God's chosen ones, 7 signs your spiritual eyes have been opened. You're seeing what others can't. She never talked much about what she saw, not because she didn't want to, but because every time she tried, the room got quiet. Eyes darted. Someone cleared their throat, and the conversation changed. So Naomi stopped talking, but the visions... Even as a little girl, she'd wake up from dreams that felt more real than waking life. Dreams where she stood in fields lit by fire, but was never burned. Dreams where voices whispered names she didn't know, but later met. Once, she saw her neighbor's house on fire a week before it happened. Told her grandma. Grandma only nodded. Eyes, she said softly, were never meant to close. Naomi didn't understand it then. All she knew was that she was different. At school, kids talked about cartoons. She talked about colors in the air that had no name. They laughed. She learned silence. But silence didn't stop the visions. She'd walk into a room and feel grief before anyone spoke. She'd pray and see faces flash behind her eyelids like film reels. Some people called it sensitivity. Others called it strange. Naomi tried to call it nothing, just to survive. But it wouldn't leave her. Not the dreams, not the visions, not the burden to speak words she didn't choose. And now, standing in her kitchen at 6:03 a.m., pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug, Naomi catches her own reflection in the window. But it isn't her current face she sees. It's the girl she used to be. The one who cried when no one believed her. The one who begged God to take the sight away. And right there, in that quiet kitchen, she hears it. A voice clearer than thought, deeper than emotion. I didn't open your eyes to confuse you. I opened them to call you. Naomi closes her eyes, but she still sees. Because the truly chosen ones, they don't just dream while sleeping. They see while awake. If you've ever seen what others miss, felt a shift no one else noticed, or dreamed what later came true, this story was written in heaven with your name on it. You're not broken. You're not imagining it. You're not too much. You were called because you can see, the girl who spoke in dreams. Naomi had always been quiet, not out of fear, not even out of shyness, but because somewhere along the way she learned. People don't want to hear what they don't understand. She lived in a 1-story cottage on the edge of town, just past the post office before the trees thickened into whispers. It was the kind of southern place where everyone knew your name, but no one knew your soul. The kind of town where, "How are you?" was a greeting, not a question. And Naomi, with all her inner knowing, was always answering questions no one dared ask. She worked at the library, filed books, smiled politely, never spoke of the dreams. But inside, her spirit was restless, because every night when the world went to sleep, her soul woke up, not just to dreams, but messages. Scenes she didn't choose, words she didn't author. Sometimes warnings, sometimes glimpses. Sometimes what felt like divine dispatches written in starlight. Once, when she was 13, she dreamed her grandmother would pass away in a red dress. A month later, it happened exactly that way, not one detail different. At the funeral, Naomi stared at her grandma's casket and felt guilt instead of grief. "I saw it, Lord. Why show me if I couldn't stop it?" That question became her companion. It echoed in church pews, it echoed in dreams, it echoed in silence. So she buried the visions beneath reason, called them coincidence, tried to blend in, tried so hard to be normal, but nothing in her spirit ever agreed with normal. Because deep down, Naomi carried a secret only the spirit could explain. She didn't just dream dreams, she walked in them. She could still feel the heat of a fire she'd seen in a vision 5 years ago, still smell the honeysuckle from a dream that hadn't happened yet, still see the eyes of people she'd never met. Until one day she did. And that was the part that scared her most. She wasn't seeking magic. She wasn't obsessed with the supernatural. She was just a girl who saw things. But now, at 40 years old, something was stirring again. The visions were returning, stronger, brighter, bolder, undeniable. And Naomi had a choice. Was she going to keep hiding or finally embrace what she'd been carrying her whole life? She opened the old wooden box on her dresser. Inside were her childhood journals, pages filled with sketches, dreams, visions, dates, places, names, things that had already come true, things that were about to. She stared at one page, a vision she didn't remember writing. It said, "You were shown because you were sent." Naomi closed her eyes. A tear slipped down. This time, she wasn't afraid. This time, she believed it. She wasn't broken. She was born with eyes that see beyond the surface. And what once felt like a burden was beginning to feel like a calling. The night realms were real. Naomi never set an alarm clock. She didn't need to. Most mornings, she woke up at 3:17, a.m.ing, not because of sound or worry, but because something holy seemed to visit her in the dark. The house would be silent, her dog still asleep at the foot of the bed, the only light a sliver of moon painting the ceiling. But inside Naomi, something stirred. Something ancient. Something eternal. It happened again that night, but this time it was different. She had drifted into sleep with her hand over her journal, a soft prayer on her lips. "God, if you still speak, speak to me." And heaven did. In the dream, she stood barefoot in the middle of Main Street. But the town was flooded. Not with rain, but with light. Blinding golden, cascading down from the sky like liquid fire. The buildings shimmered, the cars were gone, the trees bowed, and in the center of it all, a little boy crying, trapped in a glowing current. Naomi ran toward him, but her feet never touched the ground. She glided. The moment her hand reached for him, a voice thundered, not with volume, but with presence. "This is not destruction, this is direction. Warn them." She jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The room was still, but her spirit was shaking. She sat up, trembling, grabbing her journal. Flood. Boy. Light. Voice. "This is not destruction, this is direction. Warn them." She didn't understand what it meant, not yet. But 3 weeks later, the local news broke in with an alert. Flash flood warning for Jefferson County. Main Street expected to be affected. Evacuate if possible. Naomi dropped her coffee mug. It shattered like glass cannot contain glory. The flood came exactly as she saw it. No one died. But the river overflowed. And on the sidewalk, a news photo later captured it, a boy being rescued. Same shirt, same hair, same face. She stared at the photo, hand over her mouth. That was the boy from her dream. The boy she had seen before she ever met him. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. She couldn't. She walked outside barefoot, the grass still damp from yesterday's rain. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Lord, what are you trying to tell me?" And like a whisper carried on wind, the answer came. "You don't see to impress. You see to prepare. You dream to deliver. You are not imagining things. You're remembering what I already wrote." Tears streamed down her face. The girl who once thought her dreams were just sensitivity now knew they were assignments. They were how God spoke before he moved. And she wasn't crazy, she was called. Because for those with open vision, the night is not a place of sleep. It's where heaven opens scrolls. And the ones who can read them? They're the ones who dream wide awake. Part 2. Prayer became a window. Naomi had always believed in prayer. Not the loud, theatrical kind with polished words and clenched fists, but the quiet kind, the trembling, tear-stained kind, the kind where heaven doesn't just hear, it answers. Her prayer closet was small, an old linen closet turned sacred. Inside were sticky notes with names, folded scriptures, worn journals, and a candle whose flame danced like it knew God personally. It was there, on a Monday morning, that everything changed. She had been praying for her brother Micah, a man hardened by war, scarred by silence, and lately unreachable. Naomi knelt on the floor, whispering his name. God, whatever wall he's behind, send a wind strong enough to bring it down. And then it happened. As her eyes closed, they opened. She wasn't in her closet anymore. Suddenly she saw it. A car, blue, spinning out of control on a wet highway. A crash, glass, screams, and then silence. Naomi gasped. She opened her eyes, shaking. The candle beside her flickered violently, then steadied. She didn't know what to do. Was it imagination? An attack? A warning? So she did what she always did. She wrote it down. Micah, blue car, crash, highway, 11:43 AME, pray. She felt foolish. Until the call came that evening. Micah's voice was distant, half laughing. You won't believe this, Nay. Almost wrecked today. Car in front of me hydroplaned, missed me by inches, spilled my coffee, but I'm good. Naomi dropped the phone. Time of the near miss. 11:43 a.m. She didn't speak. She wept. Right there in the middle of her kitchen tile, she collapsed. Not from fear, but from awe. She hadn't just seen danger. She had intercepted it. That night, she returned to the prayer closet. Lit the candle. Closed her eyes. But now her silence was different. She wasn't begging God, she was joining him. And as she prayed, more scenes came. A woman in a hospital room, a man with tear-stained hands, a name, Clarissa. She didn't know them, but heaven did. This was no longer prayer. This was a window, a screen God used to reveal what was hidden and who needed help. She whispered, Lord, teach me how to see, and teach me what to do once I do. And the Spirit whispered back, if you pray, I'll show you. If you see, don't run. If you feel the urgency, speak it. From that day on, Naomi never doubted her place in the secret work of heaven. She still prayed alone, but she was never praying by herself. Because when your spiritual vision opens in prayer, you become a living surveillance system for the kingdom. Not to judge, but to war. Not to predict, but to intercede. She wasn't a prophet with a microphone. She was a daughter with a flashlight shining into spiritual places others ignored. And that too is holy. Part 3. The Spirit inside people. There are things you see that you were never taught to name. Naomi had always felt people before she heard them. Long before a word left their mouth, her spirit had already read their soul. It wasn't judgment. It was discernment, a knowing that had no language, just fire, color, and vibration. She never told anyone, because how do you explain that a smile looks hollow, or that someone's laugh feels like a scream behind glass? But the moment it all made sense came on an ordinary Tuesday. She was having coffee with Camille, her oldest friend. Camille was sunshine in human form, talkative, polished, always composed. They sat across from each other in their favorite cafe. Laughter filled the room, but Naomi couldn't laugh. Not today. Because behind Camille's jokes, Naomi saw it. A darkness, thin but heavy, like grief dressed in mascara, like someone screaming silently through perfect teeth. Naomi blinked, but it didn't go away. She took a breath, and without thinking, reached across the table. Camille, I don't know what this means, but I feel like God wants me to tell you. You're not invisible, and you don't have to do this alone. Camille froze. Her eyes widened, then filled. One tear slipped. Then another. Then the dam broke. She dropped her head and wept. Not because Naomi was right, but because Naomi saw what no one else had noticed. I was going to end it tonight, she whispered, but now I can't, because someone saw me. Naomi sat there stunned. The spirit rose within her like a tidal wave, not with pride, but with holy fear. This is what the gift is for, not to expose, but to intervene, not to read minds, but to rescue souls, not to elevate herself, but to remind others heaven sees you. From that day on, Naomi never ignored the weight she felt in people. Diction, she began to see behind their rehearsed words, behind their confident poses. She'd see battlefields inside the kindest eyes, and sometimes she'd see blessing, the future, a crown, a breakthrough pulsing just beneath someone's skin. It overwhelmed her. It also broke her. Because once you can see people's souls, you can't walk past them like scenery anymore. Some days it felt like a blessing. Other days it felt like bleeding. There were nights Naomi would cry, holding people's pain she had no words for. But God would remind her, you are not their savior. You are my instrument. You were never meant to carry their storm, just to point them toward the shore. So she learned to pray after every encounter, to bless in silence, to see without needing to speak, to carry compassion, not control. Because the truest prophets don't shout in microphones. They whisper to the wounded. They see pain and offer presence. Naomi's gift was not popularity. It was perception. And perception in God's hands is a portal. She didn't just see what was on people. She saw what was in them. And by grace, she stayed long enough to call the light out. Part 4. Atmospheres speak. There are places Naomi entered where her spirit knew more than her senses. No signs, no conversations, just a feeling. Sometimes it was warmth, a peace that wrapped around her like a song. Other times it was pressure, a silent weight pressing on her chest the moment she stepped in. And the more she grew in her gift, the less she could ignore it. It happened clearly one Sunday morning. The church was full, standing room only, choir in full voice. People clapped, danced, shouted. But Naomi couldn't breathe, not because of panic, but because her spirit was picking up something her eyes couldn't see. She looked around. Everyone seemed happy, but the air was thick, like a secret was sitting in the rafters, like grief was hiding beneath the hallelujahs. And then she saw her, a woman in the last pew, hunched over, still, no movement, no expression. But Naomi felt it. God whispered, "Go to her." She hesitated. She didn't know the woman, didn't have a reason, but the atmosphere wouldn't let her sit still. So she obeyed. She walked slowly to the back, sat down beside her, gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and said only this, "Still hears you, even in silence." The woman collapsed in sobs. Naomi said nothing more. She didn't need to, because heaven had already spoken, and she had simply echoed it. That was the day Naomi understood something sacred. Environments speak, and the chosen ones feel it. From then on, she listened differently. She'd walk into a grocery store and feel unease near aisle 7. She'd visit a friend's home and suddenly feel called to pray for protection. She'd step into an office and feel like the joy had gone missing months ago. It was never about paranoia. It was perception. Because when your spirit is tuned to God's frequency, the room doesn't have to speak. Your soul already heard it. But it came with a cost. There were days Naomi left crowded places utterly drained. There were nights she cried without knowing why, only to find out later someone in her circle had been battling depression or fear. She began to realize her gift wasn't just to feel, it was to intercede. God wasn't showing her atmospheres to overwhelm her. He was training her, teaching her to walk in with authority, not anxiety. So she started carrying oil in her purse. She'd anoint doors quietly, whisper prayers under her breath. No drama, no spotlight. Henry, just presence. Holy presence. Naomi wasn't trying to be noticed anymore. She was trying to be obedient. Because when you discern a spiritual atmosphere, it's not for gossip or spectacle, it's for assignment. And if God lets you feel what others ignore, it's not because you're cursed. It's because you're called to shift it. She no longer walked into rooms to assess decor. She walked in to discern destiny. And where others saw normal, she felt the need for intervention. Because when atmospheres speak, the ones with open vision don't run. They respond. Part 5. What she saw came true. Naomi sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by years of journals. Each one worn, some with bent pages, others with tear-stained entries. Every journal held fragments of her private world, visions, names, places, dreams too vivid to ignore. She had always written them down, even when they made no sense, even when they frightened her. And now, one by one, they were coming to pass. She flipped to a page from 4 years ago. March 17th, 2:42 a.m. I saw flames, a building I've never entered. A man in a red jacket kneeling in prayer. The number 134 painted on a mailbox. I woke up sweating, felt like I had inhaled smoke. At the time, she'd dismissed it, scribbled random beside the entry. But last week she had turned on the news and froze. Warehouse fire. Local hero saves 7 workers after sudden blaze on Route 134. There he was on the screen, the man in the red jacket, kneeling, praying, covered in soot. Naomi's blood ran cold. It was exactly as she saw it. Same flames, same mailbox, same posture. Except now, she wasn't dreaming it. She was living in its wake. The next day, she opened another journal, one marked "Don't Read." She had sealed it years ago. But the spirit nudged her. Inside, she found a sketch of a woman standing at a train platform. Tears on her face, a suitcase beside her. The word Detroit, written in bold letters. It was a vision she never understood until she met Tasha. Tasha was a new volunteer at the library, sweet, soft-spoken, and visibly fragile. One day she casually mentioned, "I moved here from Detroit, left everything, had to." Naomi felt something shift. She flipped back through the journal page that night and realized the woman at the train station wasn't a stranger. It was Tasha. And the vision hadn't been for Naomi's curiosity. It had been a prompt from heaven to prepare her to minister when Tasha arrived. She whispered aloud in her bedroom, "God, you've been speaking, and I'm finally learning how to listen." But with each confirmation came a deeper truth. If the visions are real, then the responsibility is too. Naomi began to carry a small leather-bound notebook everywhere, not for stories, for strategy. She wrote what she saw, what she sensed, what God whispered. Not to hoard revelation, but to steward it. And God kept confirming, sometimes in headlines, sometimes in conversations, sometimes in tearful thank yous from people she'd spoken to in obedience, not knowing the full story until after. And though it was awe-inspiring, it was never about pride. It was humbling, because seeing something before it happens is not power, it's a summons. To prepare, to pray, to speak when told, and to stay silent when not. She no longer asked, "Why me?" She began to ask, "What now?" And the Spirit would gently answer, "Now you prepare them. Now you pray harder. Now you warn when I whisper. Now you become a voice in the silence." She no longer wondered if her visions were real. She knew they were, because what she once feared was now unfolding in front of her, not as punishment, but as proof that she was being trusted by heaven. Part 6. The urge that wouldn't let her be silent. It always started the same, not with thunder, not with voices, but with a weight in her chest, like something sacred trying to break through her ribs. Naomi had felt it for years, that holy ache, the sudden urgency to speak to someone, text a stranger, send a voice memo to someone she hadn't thought of in months. It never made sense, but it never left her alone either. One night, just past midnight, she was brushing her teeth when it hit. A name. Jordan. Clear, forceful, loud, not in sound but in spirit. She froze, toothbrush in hand, staring at the mirror like it might explain what was happening. Then the words came. "Tell Jordan you are still needed. Don't give up." That was all. No scripture, no backstory, just a sentence pulsing through her like fire in her veins. Naomi didn't know what to do. She barely knew Jordan, a distant acquaintance from years ago. They hadn't spoken in at least 5. She wrestled, argued with herself. What if it's weird? What if they think I'm crazy? What if I'm wrong? But the weight wouldn't lift. So she obeyed. At 12:21 a.m., she sent a voice message. "Hi Jordan, I know this might sound strange, but I felt led to reach out. I don't have all the answers, but I felt strongly in prayer that you need to hear this. You are still needed. Don't give up. I don't know what it means, but I hope it blesses you." She stared at the phone after sending it, stomach tight with nerves. Minutes passed, then an hour. At 1:09 a.m., a message came back. Jordan's voice was trembling. "I was literally about to end it tonight. I asked God for a sign, and your message came seconds later. Thank you. You saved me." Naomi dropped the phone and sank to her knees, not because she was proud, but because the fear of "what if I didn't" haunted her. From that night on, she stopped hesitating. She understood now. The urgency wasn't pressure. It was prophecy. Sometimes the urge came at work, other times at the gas station. Once, she interrupted a man buying coffee and said, "Your daughter's going to be okay." He wept. He hadn't told a soul she was in surgery. Naomi never explained herself. She didn't need to. She had become a vessel. But with the fire came the refining. There were times people rejected her word, mocked it, dismissed it. It stung. She remembered the prophets of old, misunderstood, ignored, sometimes hated, but they didn't stop. So neither did she. Because when you carry a prophetic voice, your comfort is not your compass. Obedience is, and the moment you feel the urgency rise, it's not your job to decide if they'll listen. It's your job to speak. She still got nervous, still second-guessed herself. But she no longer let fear win. Because when someone's life is on the line, spiritually or emotionally, your silence could cost more than your discomfort ever will. She learned to ask God, "Give me the courage to speak, the wisdom to wait, and the discernment to know the difference." Naomi wasn't trying to be impressive. She was trying to be obedient. And obedience to the chosen ones is louder than applause. It is the sound of heaven breaking through. It was supposed to be an ordinary walk. Late afternoon, golden hour. The kind of light that makes even ordinary things glow. Naomi had spent the day answering emails, folding laundry, brewing tea. Nothing supernatural, nothing sacred, just normal. But for the chosen ones, normal is never the whole story. She wandered to her favorite trail just outside town, a quiet path lined with oaks and wildflowers, winding along the edge of a shallow ridge. No earbuds, no agenda, just the rhythm of footsteps and a heart quietly whispering, "Lord, I'm listening." Then it happened. Halfway up the ridge, Naomi paused to catch her breath, and in that pause, everything shifted. The trees shimmered, not with sunlight, but with something else, something weightless and electric. The wind stopped, the birds fell silent, and for a moment, time itself seemed to bow. In the clearing ahead, she saw movement, not physical, but radiant. A swirling of light, wings, figures like fire but not burning. She blinked. Once. Twice. But the vision didn't leave. Angels. Not imagined. Not dreamed. Not hoped for. Seen. They stood still. Tall, silent, watching her. And then one lifted a hand. Not to wave, but to commission. Naomi fell to her knees. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe, but her spirit knew what was happening. This was an open vision, and it was real. She didn't know how long it lasted. Maybe seconds, maybe forever. But when it faded, and the birds returned and the wind moved again, Naomi knew something had changed. She had crossed a threshold, not geographically, spiritually. She wasn't just someone with dreams anymore. She wasn't just someone who saw atmospheres, heard warnings, felt burdens. She had seen with spiritual eyes while fully awake. When she finally stood, her knees were weak, but her heart settled. See, that night, she didn't tell anyone. She simply lit a candle, opened her journal, and wrote these words. "Today I walked into a vision, and the vision walked into me. I was not hallucinating. I was being handed a mission. Because when the veil is lifted in broad daylight, when heaven shows you its reality without sleep, without warning, without apology, you can't go back to pretending you're ordinary. You're not. You've been marked." The Naomi, she didn't need another confirmation. She had seen. This wasn't a moment to chase clout. It was a mantle to carry with trembling hands. She was a seer, a watchwoman, a vessel for visions. And now that her eyes had opened, they would never close. Again, you were shown because you were sent. Naomi no longer questioned what she carried. She no longer asked, "Why do I see what others miss?" Or, "Why do I feel so much when the world seems numb?" Now she understood. The dreams, the atmospheres, the burdens, the fire in her bones when someone needed a word, the moments of silence pierced by sudden sight. It was all part of the same assignment. She was never being haunted. She was being honed, never cursed, commissioned. The visions weren't random. They were sacred briefings from heaven. And her obedience? It became the bridge between revelation and rescue. She still walked softly, still cried for people she barely knew, still felt things others called too much. But now she called it what it truly was. A calling. She kept the journals, not to remember the pain, but to remember the proof that God speaks, the visions manifest, that what you see matters. Because when you are truly chosen, your sight is not for spectacle, it's for strategy. So to the ones watching, to the ones who dream vividly, who walk into rooms and feel everything, who've been told they're overthinking, oversensitive, or overspiritual, you are not broken. You are branded by the Spirit. You see, because you're sent. You sense because you're set apart. If this story reached the deep places in you, the ones no one claps for, comment, I see what heaven shows me. Let your voice be a confirmation to others who have felt the same but stayed silent. And if God leads you to support this journey, to help these stories reach more watchers, dreamers, and prophets in hiding, follow that prompting. Because the world needs those who see in the Spirit. And you were never imagining it. You were remembering what God already revealed.